6:29. You're watching and listening to Breakfast, and still to come, the juice is loose. And on her way to Jupiter, find out more about the incredible search for life in the solar system. We're talking to an expert.
Time now for the newspapers, and the Times leads with nurses voting for more strikes, as does the iWeekend. And the Guardian has the same.
The Daily Mirror says police are worried terror groups could strike at the King's coronation. Meanwhile, the Express says the King is proud of Harry. Let's go through the papers then. This morning, Fraser Myers, deputy editor at Spiked, is here, along with journalist and political consultant Emma Burnell. Good to see you both this morning.
Good morning.
Fraser, let's start with the strikes, should we? Can't get away from it.
So the Royal College of Nurses have voted to reject the pay deal. Some health workers have accepted it, so the Unison Union has accepted.
This I find interesting because the RCN said we will recommend to our members that they accept this deal that was offered. Unison didn't. And yet their members have said yes, and the RCN members have said no.
Yeah, it's an interesting split, and in some ways, the nurses taking time off is more significant because there are fears that they will actually not be working in A&E for a 48-hour period.
Yes.
Which would make it one of the most difficult strikes so far. Clearly, the NHS has deep problems. The waiting list is now at record level at 7.2 million. The strikes are an additional disruption to that, but we shouldn't overstate the state of the strikes. So there's an interesting bit in the Times looking at whether some people have accused the unions of causing excess deaths and things like that. It turns out there's actually no evidence for that. As much as terrible as it is for all those people who have lost appointments, and no doubt they've lost them for a second or third time in a row with the way things have been run over the past few years, there's actually no evidence that the current wave of strikes is leading to...
But interestingly, there was looking at excess deaths. There was a story yesterday saying they'd gone up by 30% over the strike period.
So one thing that the statisticians have looked at is the fact that there haven't been any strikes in Wales, and yet there's been a similar kind of rise there. So it probably has something more to do with flu. I mean, post-COVID as well, we know that excess deaths have been very high from essentially all the diseases that weren't being treated for months and months on end during the pandemic.
Well, and because we were locked up so that we didn't get COVID, what we weren't doing was getting all the other things that then are now circulating. Everybody knows someone who's had the worst flu they've ever had this year. And that was always going to be part of the balance there.
Fraser was saying we shouldn't sort of over-egg the strikes in a way. It's a valid point. However, isn't there a cumulative effect on this in how we are perceiving the NHS as absolutely failing?
I don't think we perceive the NHS as absolutely failing.
Don't you?
I think because of the strikes. I think we definitely perceive the NHS as on its knees. But I think that's the cumulative effect of 10 years of poorly directed funding, poorly managed systems, the massive reorganisation that happened in 2012.
Only 10 years?
I mean, the NHS is the thing that kind of goes up in Labour governments and down in Tory governments. As if it was the case under Thatcher, it was the case under Blair. That is genuinely what happened. Now, that then does change the tax-taken tax burden, and that is the bargain that the voters make. They say, we want better public services, we will pay slightly higher taxes to pay for them. There is things that we have to underinvest in order to invest in the NHS. But the bigger problem, quite a lot of the time, is not simply should there be more money, but how is the NHS organised, how is the NHS run? There were massive, massive changes under the Health and Social Care in 2012 under David Cameron that really, really undermined an awful lot of the way that the NHS is run. That was never going to be, and unfortunately a lot of the campaigners against it at the time were like, this is going to be, tomorrow you'll see the NHS, and that's never how these things work. It's cumulative, it comes in, it starts to degrade things, and then 10 years on, this is where we are.
I'll tell you what I find interesting, Fraser, when it comes to the politics of all this, Labour always sort of says, you need a bit more money. But actually, what Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, is saying more than anything else is, it needs pretty strong reform, and that's unusual.
It is unusual, but he's right, and he's right to grasp the nettle on this. It can't be avoided. You know, the NHS does have a lot of money, and it has been getting real terms pay increases. It hasn't been sort of starved of funding. But people are right to ask, well, okay, where does that money end up? If it doesn't end up in the pockets of nurses and junior doctors, and it's not ending up in, you know, great new treatments for cancer and things like that, where is it going? Perhaps a lot of too much of it is going to the bureaucracy. The managers seem pretty well paid.
And there's so many of them.
And there are so many drowning in managers and red tape. And, you know, a lot of people on the front line are very frustrated about that, frustrated that they can't deliver the care that they know they should be able to. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree with Wes Streeting. Reform is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's literally what I was just saying. There are systemic problems in the NHS as much as anything else. That's what needs to be tackled first.
It's part of the problem for the Tories in this, is that they will find it extremely difficult politically to reform. It's actually something the Labour Party can do politically, where the Tories will struggle.
I mean, there's a phrase, isn't there, Nixon to China. Nixon was the only one who could open up relations with China because he was on the rise. The left have a better trust from the public on the NHS. They don't believe that in reforming it, they would be doing so in order to dismantle it. So I do believe that Labour have a better chance of doing that.
Well, I think it is interesting as well across all party lines. The NHS is in dire straits. It's on its knees, and most people agree.
I'll tell you what annoyed
it
me
needs reform.
on this sort of thing, because a lot of it is we talk about waste in the system. Now, and it's a tiny thing in a way, but I got a letter yesterday. I'd been to see my diabetic consultant, and I got a letter running through everything that happened. And I got it twice. Yesterday, and you just think, well, what does it cost? It's probably sent second class, but to print, stuff the envelope and post it, say it cost £1. So that happens 100 times a day, right across the country, which probably you're looking at 25, 30 grand a year. Oh, that, now I know it's not a lot of money, but that's one tiny thing.
And all people not getting their letters as well.
People not getting letters, yeah. But you say, it's probably just a computer glitch.
Yeah.
Even so,
it's costly.
I mean, and this is the part of the problem. It's not just the system of the NHS, but we are very bad in all public services, and particularly in government, at procurement. We do not buy systems that talk to each other particularly well. So again, this is one of the things that people are talking about. When you're talking about reform the NHS, it's not simply changing the shape between management and delivery, but also how do you make sure that we have, this is an enormous organisation. How do we make sure that each individual system, because that was probably two systems not talking to each other properly, and that's what, that is the sort of thing that needs mass modernisation.
Emma, let's stick with you, shall we? Because the other huge story in the paper today is, of course, the coronation.
Yes.
Getting very close now. King Charles is proud that Harry is going to attend. We finally know that Prince Harry is coming over for the coronation.
Yes, I mean, in many ways, I'm not entirely sure father is proud of his son is a front page story, but obviously when the father and son are very publicly often at outs, and one of them's the king, it makes it slightly more newsworthy.
Just a little bit.
But yes, I think, frankly, what else was Charles going to say? Of course he loves his son. And, you can be proud of Harry and disagree with him all at the same time. I think a lot of the psychodrama that we talk about is often more talked up by us than actually talked up by individuals within the actual individuals involved. I think some of the people around them enjoy the drama and briefing on it. And that, I think, is quite a big shift. You weren't so much under the last Queen getting quite so much internal voices briefing the press.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? But I just find it so heartbreaking, actually, through all of this and everything that Harry has done. I am relieved that Meghan isn't coming. Is that an awful thing to say? I'm relieved she's not coming. I just think it would cause problems.
The thing is, Meghan can't win. She's being criticised for not coming. She'd have been criticised if she'd turned up. She really can't win, so why not win at home?
I actually don't think she could have won. I agree with you, Emma. I think if she'd have come, then she would have been seen as a massive hypocrite because she's done nothing but
moan about
the royal family in Oprah interviews and Netflix. But then if she doesn't come, she looks like she's snubbing the king, and the king walked her down the aisle while and has never been anything but lovely to her. And even she said that in her Netflix documentary, that he was very, very kind to her at the wedding. So I don't think she could have won, really. But I think many people responding to that story will be saying, well, despite it all, King Charles, I mean, I'm struck by his benevolence, really, the love he has for Harry, despite really shaming him and the whole institution for the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's incredible, really. The power of love, as
the fact that, I mean,
there is. There's one or two.
It's a lot easier for us. Well, it'd be harder for us to forgive Harry not being related to him, because he has, the betrayal has been huge. No one could have expected quite how juicy the Spare autobiography was. I mean, also revealing mad stuff about himself. So I think it's fair for King Charles to maybe be proud of Harry and his time in the army, less proud of his frostbitten member.
Yes.
And shenanigans behind the pub. Yes.
Some things parents do not need to know. Meanwhile, in the Mirror, Fraser, and I sort of wonder why this is a story in a way. Is there a tactic behind it? Because they're talking about concern that terror groups could target the coronation. Well, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Of course, any big event is going to pique the interest of a terrorist organisation.
Absolutely. I mean, there were similar headlines in the run-up to the Olympics, for instance.
And even Biden's visit.
Visit. So, I mean, the security will be very tight. I suppose what is interesting and maybe a bit new is they're expecting not only kind of Republican protesters, fair enough, it's the coronation, but also environmental protesters. So the Just Stop Oil are expected to come back and try and pull things to stop. I don't think they'll succeed in that. That's particularly interesting because Charles is very famously an environmentalist. He's on their side. He said he sympathises with those campaigners. He runs his Aston Martin on cheese and
cheese
on I think it's cheese, curds, and old wine or something like that. He's had it specially adapted as like a sort of eco car.
I can think of better things to do with cheese and.
I know.
Right.
And he is, for years he's been banging on about the environment, but if you're not fully signed up, I guess, to the Just Stop Oil agenda, then you're a legitimate target. It's interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I will say though is, and it is relevant, the man that was stalking me last year, the last 16 months, he was at the Queen's funeral, and there was an altercation, and the police came over to deal with it. And let me tell you, the number of undercover police officers, it must have been 1 in every 10 people surrounded me, and it was such a relief, really, which sounds odd to say in that set of circumstances, but at an event like that, honestly, the number of undercover police officers there are, and they look like anybody.
Yeah.
They're men, they're women, they're young, they're old, you couldn't pick them out of a crowd, and they are so incognito. So that was a huge relief to me, and I did think the security at these events is incredible.
The security is incredible, and obviously in your case, thank God it was. What slightly concerns me when you dig into this story is that one of the groups that they're surveying is Republic, which is a perfectly well-established democratic organisation that has a point of view. It's not a majority point of view in this country, but they have a right to it. They've been told they can have a protest in Trafalgar Square, but if there's this kind of, we're going to surveil you, we're going to take photographs, and you're going to work out who you all are, that, I think, it has a chilling effect on democracy. It does.
And it's not as if they have a particular reputation for being disruptive or anything like that. I don't like protest groups being surveilled, but Just Stop Oil do bring things to a standstill. They do commit crime.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to differentiate between a group like Just Stop Oil, whose entire raison d'etre is to disrupt, and a group like Republic, whose entire raison d'etre is to make an intellectual argument and try to persuade the public that we shouldn't be a monarchy.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a very valid point, got to say. Now, how we quite move on to this? I don't know, The Guardian. Botox, Emma.
Botox is the injection of botulism into your face in order to stop wrinkles.
Tell I haven't had any of that.
It's beautiful, darling.
Why would you need it?
Exactly.
It is could be extremely dangerous, done unregulated.
It's poison, isn't it?
It's poison, essentially.
It paralyses your muscles.
Yeah. And It has to be done under medical supervision, but it seems that 9 out of 10 clinics that are offering it are not doing so, and they're not advertising as they're supposed to advertise the drawbacks and the fact that this is a dangerous technique. So they are. It's basically exposing a real Wild West in the aesthetic beauty market.
What does medical supervision actually mean?
Well, the person injecting you should have some sort of medical training.
Right.
This isn't happening?
No, in 9 out of 10 clinics, this isn't happening, and they are advertising these treatments as if it's just, like having vitamin C injected or something. So an awful lot of the time, what rules exist are not being enforced. And what rules there are not up to scratch, really. And we live in a world where the beauty standard is incredibly high, and it's also incredibly narrow. We're expected to look a very specific way. If you think about the look that is promoted, you think about how similar all of the Love Island contestants look, for example.
Oh,
yeah. They're carbon copies, aren't they?
Exactly. And that a lot of that look is enhanced. Now, I'm not going to take a strong stance on this. I mean, I've had my eyebrows tattooed, for example. I had that done last week. I'm very into it.
They look very good.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to be kind of judging people for taking part in the world that we live in. But I do think that given that this is, something that is predicted at least at 50% of the population, and more at men as well. Well, I mean, all women are expected to live up to. Now, whether you opt in or opt out, that's up to you. But more and more, particularly young girls, really are getting this and getting things like Botox years before they're going to get wrinkles.
This is the issue, though, and there's no regulation at all in this industry. I mean, but this is Botox. But I mean, we've spoken about filler before. Anybody can inject lip filler, cheek filler, and there's no any age, any person.
Absolutely.
There's no health checks
Really?
done.
I'm surprised.
It's the Wild West out there.
I'm surprised that 1 in 10 following the rules. Frankly, I mean, the whole industry is a bit of a sort of cowboy setup, and I'd imagine a lot of kind of beauty salons and things like that. That's also where a lot of money laundering is probably taking place. A lot of people there will have been coming to the country illegally, things like that. Has a bit of a reputation.
In my area, I don't know if this is just local to where I live or if this is something that's happening more widely, but all of the local nail salons and beauty salons all have now a poster in the window about how to spot someone who has been human trafficked in that industry. So I think there's been a real push, possibly from our local council, possibly more widely, because it is an industry, as you say, where vulnerable people are quite often caught up in it. One of the signs to spot is, do they only take cash?
Yeah, most of them.
Which is in an awful lot of them,
Yeah. It's an industry that needs so much regulation. It's an industry that's worth so much money as well.
Yeah.
It's like 3 billion or something.
And more, because as you know, Ellie, we are expected to look younger and younger for longer and longer. And
there's a pressure, but there's a danger as well.
There's a huge danger, absolutely.
I love the way she addresses all these beauty questions to Ellie and not the advisor.
I know, exactly. How do you know I've not had some work done?
We could be offended, couldn't we? We could be. We're going to leave it there. Fraser Myers, Emma Burnell, thank you. We'll see you a little bit later.
That was fun, thank you.